All right. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to something I threw together very, very quickly and did not put anywhere near the amount of planning time I should have, so it has no name currently. I may open it up to the group as far as what we should call this conglomeration, but for right now, I'm just going to call it my tabletop RPG podcasty to type thingy majig thing, where we're gonna talk about some topics that affect the tabletop RPG community. And I thank you for whoever just followed or subbed or whatever it was. I actually don't have that in front of me as far as who did what, but thank you. I just heard a
I just
sound.
hosted.
Oh, that's what it was. They hosted. Yay, yay. Um, anyway, the thing that makes this a little different than most is, or at least my attempt here. Most times when you see these kind of talking head type things about RPGs, it's all DMs, which is fine. I'm a DM. A lot of people here are DMs. We tend to have not only a fair amount of knowledge of a lot of RPG systems, but we tend to be fairly opinionated about it. But I really want us to also have the viewpoints of players, because they're going to have different views and different wants and needs about the things than the DMs are going to have. So I'm hoping we've got a nice mixture of the DMs and players here that we'll be able to give you some interesting talking points. To kind of introduce who we have today, directly below me, we have the ferocious Ben the Bear Smith sitting in as our resident DM for this conversation. Ben, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey folks, so I've been playing RPGs probably for 15, 16-ish years now.
So a newbie.
Yeah, I only just got into it. And I've been DMing probably about 10 of those, 10, 12 of those years. And I kind of DM regularly. I play games as well as a player. And I run D&D sessions for school kids as well. So I kind of DM to all different age groups and all that kind of stuff.
So
yeah.
Much cooler than I am. Got it. In our designated player chair down there is the illustrious Aaliyah, also known as Green-Eyed Trombonist. If you'd like
Hey,
to
everyone.
introduce yourself.
Yeah, so call me Ilea, call me Green-Eyed Trombonist if Ilea is too hard to spell, or, call me Ilea, Green-Eyed Trombonist takes too long to spell. Whichever you choose, I don't care. So I have been playing regularly for only 5 years now, but I've been interested in D&D and RPG games for probably over 20 years. I would say I've DM'd a couple times, but I'm much more a player than anything else, and probably what you would call a murder hobo, for those who know that term.
I will attest to that with her playing in two different games I run.
Yeah.
And then with finally in our wild card spot right over here. There we go. The always classy Don Diego.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Don. You can find me on the internet, classy_Don, just about everywhere you look. And if you're interested in hearing me actually host a podcast about RPGs, listen to my RPG podcast on all the avenues where RPGs are found. RPG podcasts are found, sorry. Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, you name it. It's all there. I've been a DM for roughly 4.5, 5 years going on. I first got into any RPG in general thanks to this man right here, Trainer Jody, several years ago off of a live stream, and I've been kind of head over heels for it since. So yeah.
We have affectionately referred to Don as the convention to the DM, because he will just randomly, like, people will go, oh yeah, really, hey, do you want to play? Bring out things. We could just do it right here.
Well, yeah, part of my convention kit, and the past 2 years, I've actually been able to do this as a professional. I have a professional badge at San Diego Comic-Con that says so, so I'm an RPG professional. Was going to conventions and bringing a bag specifically for running a game. And anytime either a friend of mine who I meet at the conventions, or just a new but interested person is there, I'll say like, hey, let's swing over to the Pathfinder or the Adventures League table, and I'll show you and I'll run it for you, or I'll help out with a panel, and then afterwards we'll typically do a game for about 2 hours, and then I'll be DMing and running those games as well. I'm a missionary when it comes to the RPG, the House of D20.
So he rolled cleric.
There you go.
So yeah, these are the people that we're going to be talking about the various subjects. The thing I wanted to focus on mostly in this first thing is really getting away from the kind of mechanic to talk that you tend to see a lot of, is like, oh, well, let's talk about, the PHB Ranger and, all the things wrong with that mechanically, or, let's talk about this adventure and what they do. I wanted to get a little bit more kind of societal kind of talks as they relate to the RPG world. With that, there kind of is two sides of the RPG world, as much as some people may want to fight that clarification. You have the D&D, and then you have everything else.
Yep.
I understand that nowadays there are tons of new systems and the things like that. Market share wise, it's not nearly as segregated as it used to be. But if you say tabletop RPG, people are going to go, or people just wander into a conversation or a stream or something like that. They go, oh, are you guys playing D&D? And if you say, well, no, actually, we're playing this really cool thing called, Vampire the Masquerade, which is a tabletop RPG. Oh, so you're not, so it's not D&D. Well, it's kind of like the D&D, but it's different because it's a different system. And so it's D&D with vampires. Yep, that's exactly what it is. But the D&D with vampires. So the first topic we're going to talk about is going to involve the D&D, and specifically, and this is going back a couple months now, but there was a rather kind of upheaval in the D&D community when at the beginning of the year, they announced that the next major book that they were publishing was the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. Which, if you don't know what that is, it's part of a campaign setting designed and created by Matt Mercer, who is the DM for Critical Role, currently the most popular D&D stream and RPG stream onto Twitch. It's been instrumental in making the 5th edition as popular as it is, and it has a lot of really great fans, and it has a lot of people that vehemently despise it. And a conversation came up around it that became very vitriolic, so we're not going to get into that aspect. But it did bring up a kind of a valid point. The 5th edition has been doing some interesting things since it launched. It established the Forgotten Realms as the official campaign setting for 5th edition, which a lot of people were happy about because it's the most popular. Thank you, Phone. It's the most popular setting, but really in the D&D history. However, there are a lot of settings, and every time a new Forgotten Realms book would come out, or in this specific instance, when the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount came out, when the Ravnica book came out, these basically new settings for D&D. You had a lot of people going, why are you making new settings for D&D when you have Dark Sun, Dragonlance, Mystara, Greyhawk, and just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of other settings. So I'd like to get your guys' opinions about Wizards of the Coast is specifically, or really any game publisher, but since this is D&D, focusing on resurrecting old campaign settings and turning them into fifth edition settings, or focusing on creating new campaign settings to introduce to the Dungeons and Dragons in general. Anyone specifically want us to start?
I'll go with some.
Okay.
So obviously, like, there's always got to be this kind of delicate balance between the audience that you're trying to target, and you'll have like that split between the like old school like Red Book AD&D audience, and then you've got new players, new fresh audiences. And with the resurgence, and obviously Critical Role is kind of a big central point with that, the resurgence of the popularity of D&D, you're getting this big influx of new players who might have done some other things in relation to Wizards of the Coast before. So they might have been familiar with things like Magic the Gathering. So you have those sorts of elements in place. But then you also have people who have come from watching Critical Role. So I think the Wildmount expansion book was kind of a given with how popular that show is. Things like the Ravnica book, they are the attempt of Wizards of integrating their kind of all their IP stuff together in a format that is really popular right now. So you have that kind of concept in, and they are still doing some books and sources that are kind of going back. You know, they've recently done the Eberron book. They did the I can't remember the name of it. The one, the kind of when they went through all the hells and stuff.
Descent into Avernus.
Yeah, they've kind of gone into Avernus and stuff, which are established planes and situations from original D&D kind of backgrounds and settings. I mean, Eberron's slightly like more recent. I think that's 4th edition, but it's still a previous kind of old plane that they've gone to and set up. So they are still trying to kind of keep a balance between the two, but you're always going to slightly kind of alienate your audiences by having one decision or the other. But I think they're trying to hedge their bets on introducing this big influx of new players, because you tend to find they're the people who are going to be buying the source books to use them as is, because they're less experienced with it, whereas your older players are probably more likely to use the books as a basis for building up their own homebrew content. And as such, they're kind of just using those books as a kind of platform to build off and take ideas from, rather than having to use them all like wholesale. So I think it's them kind of trying to be more catering to a newer audience than it is to kind of do something really nostalgic for an audience that is already fully invested in the product.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Along those lines, have you personally read the Ravnica book or the Wildmount book?
I own both of the books.
Okay. So with someone with, for 15 years of the D&D experience, who I'm assuming you've played more than just for Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
You've dabbled in other. Did you find these new books interesting? Do you find things, even if you're not playing in Ravnica, did you find things that you could use in for Forgotten Realms or the Dark Sun or whatever or your own stuff? Or was it more just like, well, if you like Ravnica, get this book. If you don't, just skip it?
I mean, it's a nice mixture of the two, because I also play Magic the Gathering, so it was nice to kind of have that kind of the references and seeing the stuff that's in there. But I've certainly kind of used a bunch of the creatures that they introduced in there into kind of campaigns that I've run. Some of the monsters, some of the class specialisms, you kind of look at and go, oh, that's a nice, interesting take. The like, for instance, the Golgari druid subclass that they put in, which has got all the kind of utilization of like fungus and spore stuff, was really cool and interesting as a character type. The stuff that they've introduced in the Wildmount book with the Dunamancy magic and the kind of Echo Knights and stuff that they've kind of put in have some really nice, unique kind of gameplay elements that I think are quite a nice introduction to put into kind of other things and other areas. So I've certainly found interesting kind of things about them outside of just being fans of the original IPs they came from, to use in campaigns and stuff otherwise. But
If I can jump in just for a second, Leah, I know you're going to speak. I know you're coming as the more player perspective here. Did you have any inclination towards any of these source books or any of these previous settings before? Does it influence you as a player?
So I would definitely agree with the idea of trying to balance old content and new content. As a player, a lot of the times you're not the one kind of deciding what content is going to happen. You might have some say on things, but it's really about the integrated model of storytelling from where I stand on
Then
that.
let me refine it. Was Critical Role or any of these sittings, like the Magic the Gathering setting of Ravnica, like something that would have pulled you in, assuming that you weren't at the time already into D&D?
I think so. And I think what's important here is the fact that we're on 5th edition of D&D. And I think a little bit of it kind of like in textbooks, like if you are forced to buy the 16th edition of a textbook instead of the 15th edition, and basically only a couple sentences have changed and the price is completely different, then you're pissed off, right? So you need to balance providing old content that has sold well in your previous editions and you can assume will sell well with your new edition, with new content that will be able to pull in new players. And so putting out a Critical Role setting and having Wildmont and everything like that is a very smart marketing move, because it's the most likely to get new people buying their content.
Yeah, so it's funny we're talking about that because you're seeing something kind of almost directly paralleled in the video game sphere currently, where now it's the time of the remakes, right? One of the biggest ones I just released is Final Fantasy VII remake. And you have this kind of pushback against, like, why do we keep going back to the old Resident Evils and the old Final Fantasies and just up-resing and up-graphicsing an experience you may have already had 10, 15 years ago? And there's a economic reason, nostalgia. You're going to pay. You already like it, so you're more likely to purchase it again. But to bring another thing for me is when I started the podcast, my RPG podcast, cheap drop. I'm going to do them all the time.
Every time you've spoken, you've advertised your podcast.
We need a podcast like counter.
I'll have to make a command next time. For chat,
but it has to be obnoxious, like
Don,
3/4
like
of the size
exclamation
of my face.
point Don plug.
No, so when I started the podcast, one of the questions I asked to Reddit, to the Pathfinder and the RD&D and the D&D Next subreddits, was how much of your world is homebrew, how much of your world is established, and there was a couple of answers, and I got about 101 hits. I actually pulled up the old survey just so I can use some hard facts here. 46% of people say they do a mix of homebrew and published, whereas 32% say everything's homebrew, and then 9% say homebrew world, but only published adventures for reference or inspiration, and then only 8% only do pure published materials. So what that means to me is that all these worlds that we're referencing back to are more than likely just inspiration points and ways to be easily like, man, I need a desert adventure, and like, oh, Al-Qadim, they just updated that to 5th edition, or man, it would be nice to go in the jungles of Cholt. Oh, they've got the great Cholt thing, they got the so all that to me, Tomb of Annihilation, that's what it's called for a second. So all that to me is just signaling that, like, it's not necessary for anyone running a game to have the brand new edition or to go into that sphere, but the benefit of it is more just for inspiration to get you a quick adventure. I say the economics of it are obviously super important. Critical Role is hands down going to be the reason I think 5th edition is going to be the longest, and I think it's already the most profitable edition that D&D has ever had.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
a lot of that has to do with inflation and a significantly larger market than any other.
And also accessibility as well.
Well, yes. yeah.
I'm not saying like critical, like you can't have Critical Role be great without a 5th edition existing. Sorry. I should preface that. But part of the reason it's in the mainstream and stuff like that is Critical Role, Stranger Things, and all that stuff like that. So I feel like established adventures are just great resources for DMs. But the vast majority of them are just economics. So when they released Strahd, everybody loved Ravenloft. Everybody loves Dracula and vampires and all that old pulpy horror stuff. So I'm not too married to the idea of having to go what is English? I'm not somebody who's stuck in the past. The whole point is these are all just reference materials for me at the end of the day. So as long as you give me something new and different, because if I can already pull from 4th edition Shadowfell information, which I did when we ran into the Shadowfell, then I really don't want them to come out with the 5th edition Shadowfell information. I've already done that campaign, and 4th edition have the gigantic book that I can access at any time I want. So please give me something new, give me something different, which is why I like Ravnica, which is why I like Eberron, which is why I like stuff like that. Dark Sun. You know.
I think there's also a good point here about new information. Who's most likely to use the campaigns as they are? I think that tends to be new DMs who might use it more as it comes out in the way it is. People who haven't played D&D before or who haven't played as a DM before. And I mean, we're all fans of things, and we've probably all come across gatekeepers and trying to get into something new that has a huge past and all the information that you are supposed to know in order to be a fan, which I don't agree with, but that can be super overwhelming and make it really hard to start something new if there's this long history that you are expected to know. So by creating new campaigns, I think that it makes it easier for new people to actually jump into the RPG.
Well, and, speaking of gatekeeping, Simon in chat actually kind of brought up that idea, and I want to kind of introduce his idea, where he says, I see the same strange kind of resistance to new stuff in a lot of other fanatic fandoms. Folks act like repressive holy gatekeepers, the kind adventurers usually overthrow, saying things like you can't do that instead of acting like explorers of the wondrous new content. From that idea, do you guys see as players, as the DMs, as just people running around the fandom, do you guys see a lot of kind of gatekeeping when this kind of new stuff gets introduced? Things like this is something as simple as Princes of the Apocalypse was basically introducing the Temple of Elemental Evil, which is a brilliant first edition adventure, and kind of updating it and changing it for 5th edition. And you had people going, oh, great, I love the Temple of Elemental Evil. And you had other people going, this isn't the Temple of Elemental Evil. You know, where's the mega dungeon? Where's this? Where's that? So as far as gatekeeping, what have you guys seen?
So, you know, I've in terms of kind of the stuff that I've seen on it, in terms of like players who I've played with and campaigns that I've ran, all those sorts of things, it's never really been an issue because a lot of the people, you know, I don't play with people who get like that. So it's kind of, you can tell fairly early on the kind of people, you know, I choose to play with people who are kind of fun and interesting people, and not people who, you know, it's that kind of mentality. And I see it all the time when you see it in comments and the people that have been bringing it up, like where people have kind of, the reaction online is so toxic in places because people just get so kind of wound up about, this isn't my thing that I know, and it's like my experience, and they don't care that like potentially other people haven't played it before and all that kind of, they think that makes their experience somehow better than people who hadn't gone through it the first time round. And it's just like, get over yourself. It's a game where people are playing make-believe with swords and shields in a fantasy world in your brain. Get over it a bit, really. It's like, you know, it's fun is fun. Whether you find it fun in that way and some people find it fun in another way, great. Go and have your kind of fun over there with other people who have that kind of fun as well, and let the other people enjoy themselves.
Gatekeeping is an extension of this idea that we're going to somehow taint or lose that thing that we loved so much, or that experience that I had, right? Because like Tomb of Horrors is one of those ones to where I hear a lot of people who are like, oh, that's the adventure where you're supposed to kill your party at every turn, everyone's supposed to die. And I think when they updated it, it wasn't as deadly as I think people wanted it to be. And my response has always been, you know, I understand where that comes from. You're never going to be able to recreate, you know, the first love that you ever had, man, woman, or whatever, and that feeling or that song you heard. Like that nostalgia is very strong. It's impossible to recreate. I understand that. But you can't then turn around and say your fun is wrong if somebody wants to have that experience, and maybe it's different than the way you had it, but they still had fun nonetheless, right? So to any of these people who have this like idea that there's something impure or inauthentic in what they're doing, I would say at the end goal of what we do in our role playing games is we're just trying to have fun with other people, right? We're enabling each other to have fun. That's why I like this format and why I like this so much. I have a podcast about it, which you can listen to on iTunes, on Spotify, and on Podbean or wherever RPG
And
podcasts
that's
are.
another line on the counter.
I need mods to make commands for me.
No, but I love this format because it's in all the things we do. There's an almost an always persistent level of like competition, right? You want to be the best at your job, so you get a promotion. You want to be the best at Call of Duty and get the most kills or whatever it is we do. This game lives and dies off the fact that everybody at the table wants everybody to have fun. And the DMs, us particularly, our job is 100% about making sure those people have fun more than we have fun. Because if we're just having fun, there's no game. If they're having fun, there's a game.
So, I did not mention this, but I have written for Geek and Sundry before, and
do you want to plug your stuff too?
This
you can
is
read
a
it
story
on this
that
web link.
you can, but this is a story that requires that kind of information.
Okay.
The big thing that I did for Geek and Sundry was what I call fandom D&D, where I would take characters from a beloved fandom like Sailor Moon or Harry Potter, and I would turn them into PCs for 5th edition. And really just as a way for people to get inspired and see that they could access these characters if they wanted to. But the most controversial one that I ever created wasn't cereal mascots, which was a thing. It was actually My Little Pony. And there were two very strong separate sides of this. There were people who were talking about how this wasn't D&D and it was Geek and Sundry promoting pedophilia because they are under the assumption that grown men like My Little Pony because they like little children. And then there was
that's a leap.
It was a huge argument. Many people were making that leap. But then there was the other side, which was parents saying, thank you for making these. Now I have something where I can like play with my kids and it's accessible to them. So we see two very sides here. One that is very gatekeepy and you are destroying the thing that I love, and one that is you're making it accessible to more people.
Yeah.
And those are just two sides of the same coin. But on the point that we said before, we all want to have fun. Like Don said, that is why we're gathered around a table together or on the internet together to tell a story together, maybe for me to set fire to people or buildings.
It's a story. Still a story.
It is still a story.
It's just a
but
fiery story.
Yeah, and there are many
stories
kinds of
getting
fun.
hot.
As long as everyone at that table agrees to the kind of fun you want to have, then I say have whatever fun you want. Just don't spring it on people.
And I think me, but personally, having dealt with not only gatekeepers in fandoms, but I had to deal with professional gatekeepers. As weird as this sounds, I worked in retail for years. And one of the things I ran into on a fairly regular basis was I was really good at my job and I got promoted fast. And there would be other managers that didn't like me coming in and saying, hey, we're going to do things this way. I wanted to try this. Like, that's not how we do things. I'm like, yeah, no. That's why the store hasn't made profit in 10 years. They kind of paid me to change that. And so this idea of gatekeeping, what I learned in retail and eventually learned in gaming and that as well, gatekeeping, at least from what I've observed, is very rarely about it's very rarely about the connection they had with their old thing. A lot of it turns into just an exercise of control they feel powerful and in control, that they have spent all this time learning and they have all this knowledge that other people don't, and they can use that to get what they want. And they can use that to manipulate people. Oh, well, yeah, we're going to Baldur's Gate, but we're going to be in Baldur's Gate set in, the DR 1284, so this part of Baldur's Gate isn't there right now, and it's actually ruled by this. And just by using this extra knowledge they have and kind of weaponizing it, they can control other people. And as soon as you start introducing the things that they don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of, you're taking away some of their power. At least that's been the people I have interacted with. That is what I've come away from the conversation with. Not saying that's how everyone thinks, but I have seen it as very prevalent of the thing.
Yeah, I think that's a very kind of fair kind of assessment of it in terms of what sort of things that is important to them. It's more it's a lot more about them rather than the kind of overall kind of general experience of things. It's that kind of insular kind of exclusivity of their kind of enjoyment rather than being inclusive to everybody.
Mm-hmm. And it's strangely, it's fear of change, which this game kind of has to. Listen, every story is about change, right? Every story arc you ever tell, it's never like the kingdom had a horrible king, and it's still going to have a horrible king. Thanks for playing for 6 weeks with me. Like, no, like that's not the story you ever tell. You always tell the story that starts at a place and then will be changed forever by your players, because then they feel like they're doing something and you feel like you're actually telling a narrative. So it's weird that in a game and a hobby that we love so much, that's all about change and all about overthrowing those types of people, like we mentioned earlier, gatekeepers and people like that somebody would be afraid. But yeah, it sounds like a control thing. You're right on that, Jody.
So along that little line, let's kind of shift topic from the D&D world to the realm of just crazy amounts of RPGs. I did a video on this on my YouTube channel, where you can watch the full episode of this, along with other series I produced, like Play Your Faves, D&D did a deep dive, and other rambly things.
And by the end of this, you better start plugging your Twitch as well. Everybody's got to get their plugs in, man. Everybody's got to get their plugs in.
I'm stalwart. I am not plugging myself.
Anyway, in the wider world of RPGs in general, they tend to be kind of put into two categories. You have your class-based RPGs, which are things like D&D, even things like Vampire the Masquerade. You have your clans that kind of act as your class and will kind of define what you can and can't do. And then you have classless or skill-based RPGs. And a very popular argument as a starter in the RPG world is, well, which one's better? Obviously, GURPS is the absolute pinnacle of all things, unless you want to talk about the Cipher system, which is vastly superior. But then you can talk about the Fate system, which blows them all out of the... And it'll go like that. So the question I would like to ask to you guys... as far as classless versus class-based, what do you not even prefer? What do you like? What do you dislike about the different things? And have you specifically found a system that is not D&D, that for whatever reason the mechanics or something like that has just gone, ooh, this looks cool. This gives me ideas. So
first of all, I just really briefly want to say that clearly the best RPG system is the Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Well,
RPG
obviously. I was talking about everything other than that. We're competing for second place here. But on that idea, Ilea, I know you personally have played the D&D and have played a classless RPG, because both of those were my games.
Yes.
So, what are your thoughts on the class versus classless?
Well, here's another plug. Technically, I'm an RPG game designer, according to BoardGameGeek.com. So I end up thinking a lot about like class versus skill versus actually like more amorphous kind of storytelling games, like more tabletop LARPy. And I think for me as a player, it's helpful to have like I don't really care if it's a class or skill based system. I think that there are benefits and drawbacks to both. But it's helpful for the player to have some form of control over their character, other than just like what they do, but making the decisions about why they do it, about what they choose to put skill points in, like why choose a gnome over a halfling? Is there a story reason? Are you min maxing? Whatever the case will be, I think that it's really important that players have that choice because I think that's what connects them to their character. So that doesn't actually answer your question, but
Yeah, but to say, however, it did give me a good idea for a name for this podcast, which is "Can I plug blank?"
Shameless plug show.
Yeah.
Free advertising RPG podcast. That's what you should call it.
Yeah. And fun fact, I'm going to be taking a game design course next semester, and I currently have 4 games that are in production, and I have to choose which one I'm going to focus on for that class.
That's awesome.
That is very cool.
Yeah, congrats.
So while the rest of us are maybe learning how to knit or learning a new song, in my case, Ilea is simultaneously building for 4 brand new games. So yeah, I hope the rest of you feel as useless as I do.
I'm also going to learn about gems. And if you want another plug, I just had a lecture for games, culture, and representation for the class I'm teaching this semester that is on my YouTube channel.
Definitely. We should really plug ourselves more.
Yeah.
But to the question, so what I like about class-based systems is that it helps refine the type of character you want to create. And whether I'm playing D&D or another system, one of the things I find myself always trying to do is kind of check in with the party and see if everybody's obviously enjoying this session or the arc or stuff like that. And I've found over time, and of playing many, many games, some will pick up groups and some with the same persons time and time again, that it's really, really, really helpful if you can kind of give somebody a sense of purpose in the party overall. So even if somebody who has a more, let's say, charismatic approach in real life ends up doing way more role playing and wants to do extensive dives into their backstory and their strife and all that stuff, and you're not that type of player, you at least know, like, oh, when it comes time to that they get hurt, I'm the healer and I become the MVP player, because without me, you guys are all failing death saves and gone, right? Or you guys are all going to be, eviscerated and assimilated to the board or whatever. So ultimately, as I played more, because I started obviously from a great background of like very accepting people and being taught by really great DMs who were very accepting to any new idea you came up with. And I found out that while that's really, really great, yes, I'm propping you up, sir. Yeah, while that's really, really, really great, the generalist with like a group of generalists is not that fun of a game. But like once you figure out those inter party dynamics or interplayer dynamics, and that's what a class-based system does, and that's what also a race-based system does. Though I don't know if we want to get into the race benefits.
Go for it.
That's a bigger conversation though. Like the idea of like, why am I picking a gnome over a half orc, or why am I picking Argonian over like, so all these decisions ultimately at the end of the day are helping to define your character and your role in what you're doing, role-playing games, right? Role-play. So the argument sometimes is made that like I should have the freedom to make a whatever I want. And there's a game system, by the way, a very small game system called OVA. It's kind of anime-based OVA. Look it up, guys. But the way they do stuff is there's no classes, but they just have an amount of kind of benefits and negatives kind of tally that you keep track of. And you make your own attacks up. You go, okay, this attack is going to be a punishing attack, so it's going to have, +1 to damage, but it's going to have a -1 to my defense when I make this attack. So like you tally it up, and then as a game master, you make a decision whether like, all right, guys, I want this to be a harder game, so your max total is -10. So you can have one big super Kamehameha move, but it drains all your energy, and you have to have all these negatives on the other side, right? So like what's great about that system is while it's classless, it still helps you define your character because like I've got these numbers to play with and I get to make up whatever I want. So if I'm going to be the super tech wizard, Tony Stark type, I also have to take all these negatives. So like maybe I'm neurotic or super scared, or maybe I have whatever I'm obnoxious, and I've like whatever these negatives are, or in combat's case, maybe I'm super fragile. I'm a glass cannon. My machinery does amazing amounts of damage, but it ends up hurting me. Whatever that is, the system intentionally makes you kind of define what you're going to be. And that's my feeling ultimately on race or class based systems or benefits, is all it is a vector for you to define who you are at the table. And I think they help more than they hinder. I understand the other side where they come out of like, well, this creates this sort of racial bias against like, why do half-orcs have to be dumb and strong? Why can't you be a half-orc wizard? Well, statistically, they don't get the intelligence bonus. You really should go gnome. Or like, I can see where that comes from. But when it's just that, like, oh, this doesn't help me define my character as a game master, you should be able to go like, I just flip the stats and it's fine. Don't worry about it. But I just find it works better for defining your role in the game.
Yeah. Though I am thinking back to the first game that we played together, Don, where after the game, because I have a halfling bard and
Yes.
I argue that she is chaotic good.
Uh-huh.
We like ended the game and you went, "Are you sure you're chaotic good?" So there can also be preconceptions, right? Which is a more minor form of the whole like systemic race and class issues that we could go into, but I think that needs to be its whole own show.
Yeah, maybe we'll go into that in the next, but plug me.
Yeah.
RPG episode.
Yeah. And like that moment wasn't a moment of tension or anything between us. It was funny. But there are different ways that people interpret their characters and what these different skills or classes or races or whatever the thing may be mean, right? So while I think that my characters are chaotic good and I think I'm overall chaotic good, other people may read her actions as chaotic neutral or chaotic evil, depending on the day.
Well, that's kind of people's interpretations of morals more than anything else. My kind of in general experience of class and skill-based settings, I've DM'd for both. I've played for both. As a player, for me, they are a means of, as people have kind of pointed out, to help kind of structure my character and kind of working out what is it I kind of want to do with them. So when you've got class-based systems, you can kind of go, okay, I want to be able to do this sort of thing. What class fits that description? And then I can kind of mold it and kind of go along with that kind of concept. But also, as a result of that, you can also use it as a platform to do something very different to that kind of dynamic. Because as people have pointed out, the whole kind of certain racial kind of picks will have certain stereotypical responses, like half-orcs being dumb and strong and that kind of set of things. You can use that as a base going, oh, I want to do something that's very specifically diametrically opposed to what people expect that particular class to be. So, having like a non-combat based paladin, or having like a rogue, like I always saw, I can't remember where I saw it. It was a post on the internet. The rogue that had like crazy high charisma instead of dexterity. So it would go around trying to rob people, but they would just charm the pants off them to the point where they wouldn't care. And that kind of setup of things. So creating something that is unique and interesting in a class that you wouldn't normally expect to be is always quite a nice, interesting one. Yeah. I've also kind of, what Don was saying with the whole kind of having games that have like positive and negative skill attributes that you can kind of build together and put those sorts of things together. Those are some really interesting ones, because from a character standpoint, for me, I love having characters with flaws. Like having something that is a detriment to your character, because it's more realistic, because we're not all kind of fancy super beings that are great at everything. We, most of the time we suck at the majority of things, because the general kind of rule of things. So it's always nice to have some kind of characteristic or flaw that allows you to kind of play off of, whether they are, whether it is like an intelligence-based thing, so you're walking around as an idiot, or you have terrible social interaction, so you go around just being blunt and abrasive towards everybody you come across, or any kind of combinations thereof in between. You know, some of my favorite characters have been ones that have had like horrendous kind of downsides to them because they create interesting and dynamic concepts. As a DM, the difference between the two is kind of how I want to shape the theme of what's going on in a campaign. So, like, I'll run D&D stuff because it's a nice kind of high fantasy kind of setting. You're supposed to feel like a larger than life character where it's good versus evil. You are kind of superheroed up with all these special powers and abilities, and you're smiting evildoers and all that kind of stuff. It kind of feels that sort of way. I'll play some of the other kind of settings where you want a bit more of a grey area and you have characters that are a bit more kind of balanced out and set up. You know, a lot of good horror RPGs tend not to give their players like those big skills and abilities. It's kind of, yeah, you're just a person. And I have all the
here's
skills
the most horrible situation ever.
Yeah,
enjoy.
I have all the skills and abilities. You have to panic at them. And it's that kind of nice dynamic, you know, kind of that you kind of skills and abilities and stuff kind of become secondary. They're kind of a little bit there to kind of help just give you a little bit of guidance in relation to those. But, you know, it's about kind of that feeling of slight helplessness in the given situation of faced in front of something horrific. In terms of kind of mechanics that kind of interest me in terms of games that I've found that are interesting, I think there's a couple. Like, I like, because obviously a lot of them use dice, so whenever a group tries to use something other than dice, always interests me as a potential option for games. So things like the original kind of Deadlands stuff where you played with a deck of cards and you played with like poker hands and things like that was always really cool. Dread is a really interesting one for me because it uses the Jenga tower and it just adds a really nice bit of tension to a scene without having to kind of have just dice rolls and stuff, because the physical tower is equally as imposing as what's happening in the kind of conjuration of the imagined scene. So, you know, it's those kinds of things that take some of the randomness out of elements to give the players a bit more control in what things they want to do, and it stops you kind of having this really cool, because as much as like I love kind of RPGs, there's these really like moments where someone's got this really cool idea for doing something and you go, yeah, okay, roll a dice. Oh, I rolled a 1. It's gone horribly wrong. And my cool awesome moment has been ruined. So when you have games that kind of temper that ever so slightly, just to give it a little bit more of an edge on things, I kind of find that it's nicer for the players to kind of get more into what's going on because they have a bit more control about influencing what is happening and going on.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, we're still trying to facilitate somebody to have fun or to have an experience finding whatever that character or whatever they're trying to play is. So like class-based systems, you know, I guess their one drawback would be like if you don't have something that fits inside those parameters exactly to the way that you want it to, there's kind of a frustration that comes from that. And I can totally understand that. And mentioning kind of systems that are really cool and really interesting, the Outbreak Undead, which is a survival horror system, is really, really, really great for that. But I've seen a game played where you play yourself and then you have to justify with the DM, because you get very low stats in this game. Like your odds of hitting or doing anything are very low because it's a horror game. You're not supposed to succeed. And a lot of times, depending on how far you are from the target score to hit, is how bad or how positive the thing is. But the fact that you're playing yourself and you have the opportunity in the game to argue with the DM, like, I should have more proficiency at this because I once, you know, went to a gun range. My dad showed me and I was a pretty decent shot. I had a good spread, and he goes, okay, fine, I'll say your stats at 28 as opposed to 22, but still that's a hard D100 roll, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's like the ultimate version, and I wouldn't give it to newbies because that's obviously something to where like, you have to be comfortable in yourself to be like, all right, what role am I actually going to play in the zombie apocalypse? Because like, as much as I like to think I'm Hugh Jackman or Chris Hemsworth and I'm just beating the tar out of everything, I'm realistically not that good. But, you know, I can program C++ and somehow that's going to help. I think we'll figure it out, right?
Oh yeah, I would be dead body number 37.
I wouldn't make it past the opening credits.
Don would just have one of those Jurassic Park moments. It's in Linux.
I know
it's in C++. I need to know this.
I think that's an important thing though for people to talk about their expectations with games as well, because flaws I think are awesome. I love them. As much as it can suck to roll a 1, that can become a really interesting story element in a game. So if the player expectation is I'm going in here to fight and to win everything, it might be a recalibration for things. So like one thing that I like to do is impose flaws on myself. I would say I tend to be a little bit more wise in real life than the characters I play. So I will do self-imposed wisdom checks to make sure that my wisdom is not influencing the decisions they make. And I did this in a Curse of Strahd campaign when we were at the Amber Temple to decide if I was going to make deals with any of the dead gods and goddesses.
Oh, my party took so many of those. It was like a supermarket to them. They just kind of went, just put them all in the bag.
Oh yeah, I had like a -1 or something mod to my wisdom, and I rolled a 1. So I made deals with 17 out of 20 gods and goddesses. And it completely changed like the gameplay dynamics of my character and made for some really interesting moments going forward, and like some moments of betrayal and most of the party assuming I was evil anyways. But if you don't allow for those flaws and for the failure rolls, then and you're disappointed by those, then you're missing out a lot, I think, on the actual story aspect.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's kind of just go on.
I love the idea of everyone else's character looking at this as, oh, this could be really bad, and yours is just like, supermarkets to sweep!
Oh, yeah. And I think those are like charisma saves or something, but whatever it was what her highest stat was. So she succeeded all of those rolls. Yeah. And then she had bat wings and like no eyes and crazy hair.
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of the dice rolling thing, I think on the odd occasion, if it's like a one-off kind of thing, like a one-off situation happening, then you kind of like, okay, that's like, you can have an interesting or a funny moment or something that kind of creates a bit of dynamic element. But if you've got a situation where, like, for a prolonged period of time, for like a couple of sessions, your character is kind of not doing anything because the dice rolls are just not landing. Like, just everyone's had them. Those sessions where you can't roll higher than a 2. And it's like, you're like, I'm going to do nothing. Why? Because if I try and do anything,
bad things will happen.
I'm going to draw my sword and it's going to explode for some reason. You know, it's going to like, and I think in those instances, it can kind of feel a little bit down because you're not really contributing anything at that point. Why I kind of like systems that help kind of like flatten the bell curve a little bit, so you kind of get a bit more of an average kind of setup. So some things are still going to possibly suck, but you can have a bit more kind of average bit. But you know, part of the fun is rolling dice. So.
Yeah. So in Open Legend, there's a succeed with a twist option, right? Which Jody can talk about.
I use that in D&D. And now if you fail a roll, I'll go, well,
you got it.
You can't. I like to give players choices because it makes them really scared. Now I'll go, well, how does this sound? You can either choose to fail the roll because you didn't roll high enough, or you can succeed, but something else is going to happen. And it's really fun to watch the player go, and rethink every choice they've made in the game.
Yeah.
Anyway, so sorry for interrupting.
No, they were good.
Okay. My personal opinion, this actually goes back to what Ilea does with those characters she used to make out of stuff, and I have a show on my YouTube channel called Play Your Faves, where I could anyway, it's something that I've done for years. I really love doing it. For me, a class-based system, I think the limitations encourage creativity, and so for finding ways to use the restrictions of the system to do things differently, kind of like what Ben said. I get a kick out of. Like every character I've ever played, aside from I think one, I make weird characters. Like I have a warlock sorcerer hybrid who is literally a spell slinger. They have a curved wand that they keep in a holster on their hip, and due to the mechanics of Eldritch Blast and Quicken spell, they can shoot off 4 or 6 shots in a single round. So they just pull it out and go. And I'm gonna make characters like that because they're weird and they're interesting, and they're not what you would expect. You know, a druid that plays as a melee tank warrior that doesn't transform, and primarily uses things like flaming scimitars and stuff like that. Or, you know, I have my blade singer wizard, whose favorite thing to do is get right in front of the enemy, start dancing and cast blur on themselves, and just watch the big baddie swing and miss over and over and over again. Like I think in that situation, but playing a class-based system is for me a little bit more fun, because it forces me to be creative, whereas a lot of classless or skill-based systems, you kind of just go, okay, well, this is what I want to do. What do I have to do to get to this point? And then you just buy this as skills you want.
Yeah, I'll say the one thing I guess will kind of summarize the points I was trying to make earlier is a class-based system gives you something to fight with or against. And like kind of like Netflix, where there's too many options, so you're crippled with choice and you don't do anything. That's what a lot of systems and a lot of people, when they get into Dungeons and Dragons or any RPG system, might feel when they start, which is why classes are there and do great. And I noticed as people play more and more and more, and I've had people in my Monday game who plays 20 years. So what can I do to make this guy interested? I can't do anything to throw him off, right? In my mind. But he goes, I'm just going to play this weird sort of kobold, or I'm going to play this weird sort of druid who feels a certain way. It's so off class, so off kilter, so against anything that makes min-max sense. But because you've played for so long, that becomes just a springboard then. Whereas if you were new, that's a thing to latch onto for dear life. And that's kind of my point.
Well, and another thing I don't think people have mentioned about a class base, if you open up the PHB, the first generally like half a page, sometimes a full page of a class description is all lore. And so if you are trying to build a character but you don't know this is setting or anything, sometimes just picking a class can actually help you to define. Like a ranger and a fighter can both be dual weapon wielding, people that you run in. But if you pick a ranger, you have that kind of nature aspect to it, or that hunter aspect, whereas the fighter tends to have a little bit more kind of militaristic, self-made kind of thing. So I like that as well. Not to say I don't like skill-based RPGs. I played a few sessions of GURPS. Did not like that, but it's very similar to this system you mentioned, Don, where you had positives and then the negatives you could add to your character, and if you wanted to add more good stuff, you had a set number you could go to, and if you wanted to add more good stuff, you would just add negative attributes, which would bring your number lower, so you could add more good stuff. And it's a cool, interesting system. But I was really new. Like, it was the first non-D&D game I'd ever played. And it just became overwhelming to me, where now I have a blast with skill and classless based ones, just because now that I understand how RPGs work, it's not this huge sea of, well, I can put points anywhere. I don't know what to do. It's more of, I know I can do this and this, and I can use this feat and these, and create some fun things. To kind of slightly shift in this is the same topic. How many of you are familiar with one-page RPGs?
familiar with them. I've never actually ran one or been
Okay.
in one.
In this is the same realm of classless versus class-based. A lot of the one pages I've seen technically have a class system, but tend to be simplified to the point like a kids on bikes. You can pick kind of an archetype, but the archetype is more for flavor than anything else, and you can really kind of define your character on, I can do this well and I do this poorly and kind of things. What are your guys' opinions on like your things like again, kids on bikes, honey heist, so stuff like that? These kind of real quick to set up, one shot kind of
Sure.
games.
Whenever I talk to somebody about RPGs, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of a missionary when that happens, when I'm out and about. More than and more, yeah, more our great God Thaco, may he rest in peace. No, in in bars and out in parks and things like that, because I don't typically have my dice like right in my pocket. I'll explain somebody with an intro, or I'll give them a concept of basically what a one-page RPG is. I'm like, okay, you want to be a scientist, you're good at intelligence stuff, maybe you're not strong, whatever. So if all of a sudden a giant blast happens in your lab and there's smoke bellowing from the other room, what are you doing? Okay, well, you succeed on that because you're smart. Like if you think like, oh, I need to get down because the smoke is up there and I can't breathe that smoke. Okay, you're using your intelligence. Whereas if you're trying to do a strength thing, maybe you're not going to be able to barrel through that door, which has got a hot hand, right? So at the end of the day, I think those things are great if you want to pick up and play with a bunch of friends who just don't want to go through a giant sheet. And if you're talking with somebody new who just wants to get the idea of what role playing is, not anything system based or class based, just the idea of what role playing is, a lot of things like Honey Heist and these one pagers are perfect for that because, Honey Heist, roll for bear and roll for criminal. Like that's it. Wherever on the spectrum, like this action will take you, that's it. That's all you have to think about. So like, that's brilliant in that regard. And it's great for those small things.
I mean, in terms of stuff that I've kind of done recently with that, I've kind of my vague plug. I got the Labyrinth adventure game that is basically a TTRPG of the.
Everybody else plugging their own stuff. Ben plugging.
I plugged other things. Yeah, I got this. It's fairly new. I think it's only a couple of weeks since it came out. But the entire system rolls around. You want to try and do this thing, roll a d6. And if you hit the number, you succeed. If you don't, you don't. And it's such a simple kind of just mechanic setup where it's kind of, you don't get bogged down with the rules a whole lot. It's all just about kind of, here's a really simple setup. Your character has like a skill based off what race you picked. That is more just a kind of, here is a useful skill that your character might be able to do. So when you're thinking about how to problem solve, like how Don was saying, it's that kind of idea of, oh, you can do this thing, so that means that your number will be easier to roll, or that sort of stuff. And it's a nice, it means you can focus on the story and interaction as opposed to getting bogged down with the kind of how the mechanics are going to work and kind of go, all right, so whose priority is it? Oh, they've got this, and then they've got a reaction set up, so then this happens, and then this happens here, which causes this thing to trigger, which can really bog stuff down. Because one of the big things that I've kind of found with most people, particularly when you're talking about things like D&D, is the combats drag out so long, particularly if you've got a slightly larger party than is the recommended, that people can just be sitting around for a long time and waiting whilst combat is taking place. Whereas if you've got such a really simple system like this, you can go, right, you're going to fight this goblin, do your bit, roll dice, well done, job done. It keeps the pace nice and fluid so that you can you don't get bogged down in the places where it kind of can feel like it drags, and you can kind of keep it nice and straightforward. And which, like, again, as people were saying, it's really useful for new players because they don't want to get bogged down in stuff like that, and it kind of just helps kind of introduce them to the concepts of having to think about stuff a bit more, kind of, how would this character do this thing, or how would you interact with this particular person, what things might you say. So it's those kinds of things that I think are really useful for those kind of nice simple systems to kind of work with in players.
Real
Yeah.
quickly, I just want to know how, and it could be a spectrum. It doesn't have to be a yay or nay thing. Do you prefer rolling more or less die in your systems, especially when it comes to like battle or resolving conflict?
In terms of kind of
or cards or whatever the system calls for, like how much do you like randomness and chance versus like I role played really well and my character is this, so I should succeed?
I like more that the role is influenced by the actions and decisions of the player rather than I prefer that it's I prefer of the three letters, I prefer the RP part than the G part.
Okay.
I feel like it's about telling a story and a narrative, and the mechanics are there to help kind of put a bit of structure in place rather than it be a question of numbers. So I'm not, the idea of playing like an assassin rogue where I'm going to roll a sneak attack and get like 8d6 damage, which then crits, so I get double that. And the mechanics bit's kind of hair. I like dynamic sequences or tense conversations or really badass cool combat moments that you kind of go, whoa, that was really cool, rather than I did 57 damage. That's kind of my kind of personal relation to it.
Aaliyah, same thing? You're nodding a lot.
Yeah, I'm definitely more on the role-playing side, but as I said, I do tend to be a murder hobo, and a lot of the time that does involve combat and rolling dice and getting damage. I don't think I'm a min-maxer. I think other people might disagree. Especially
What's
in
your
the
base advantage on entropy attacks?
5. That's the open legend system, but that fits that character. So I tend to have characters where combat is kind of my stress relief during the week, being able to kill orcs or children or whatever the case might be in a game.
That got dark fast.
Yeah, orcs, children. Wait, what?
that is the only.
Too.
That's the only
orc
scale.
Children. It should be orc children.
That's literally the scale of how it goes to. There's no middle ground. It's straight from one.
Is
to
it
the next.
bear
the
or
ground is
criminal?
orc children, because then she feels bad and not bad at the same time.
I could feel bad about adult orcs too. I'm sure they have families.
It's like, I suppose.
Maybe.
It's not got the same feel as stabbing the orc children.
Yeah. So like, I kind of get both sides where you have different players, and you have some players who are sometimes really not comfortable putting themselves out there with the improv aspect, especially if they're new to role-playing games, where I see then the dice or whatever chance-based system is implemented in the game can really help them with moving their characters forward and getting more comfortable in the system. But going back to the original question about the one-pagers, I think those are great for new players. The time that I DM'd for friends, none of them had a player's handbook, which means that they were all trying to build their characters using my one copy of the player's handbook. And none of them were familiar with the game, so it was hours of character creation. And, usually you have session 0 maybe where you put those things together, and that's what we did have. But it was extremely complex and trying to cross-reference things for people who had no knowledge of the system. And one of the players ended up completely changing their character after the first game because what they were playing wasn't what they ultimately were really feeling for the game. So when you have one-pagers, a lot of times those can be one-shots, quick sessions, not take a lot of setup, or you can adapt them to go longer if people are having a lot of fun with it. But they're really great for people to get that experience and kind of, I'm going to describe this in another horrible way, that first hit of RPG heroin.
Yep.
That then gets them more kind of hooked and wanting to put in that effort and time to really invest in their character creation later.
Whereas I'm an RPG missionary, she's an RPG drug provider. She's
Pusher.
a dealer.
She's
a
an
dealer. She's a
RPG
pusher. She's a
pusher.
There you go.
I
Pusher.
am not a dealer. I am a distributor.
Sorry. Higher on the food chain.
With that, I'd like to shift to our of a final topic of the night, which is generally, all this kind of the theory crafting is really interesting, and talking about the stuff we like, we don't. But the tabletop RPG community as a whole is not just about the products and that. There are other things that happen that affects what's going on, not only in game but with the population as well. But because of everything going on literally around the world, we can't really have a conversation about current events without discussing the inability to meet with people face to face in order to avoid those words that are otherwise forbidden on certain platforms. For tabletop RPGs, we've seen this massive surge of online tabletop RPG playing, whether playing through something like this, where it's all the theater of the mind, or using a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, or a combination of that. As far as what's happening currently, and what you guys have been observing, I have a very specific aspect of this online conversation that I wanted to talk about, but I want us to save it to last because mine is slightly ranty. Overall, what do you guys feel about the idea of playing online versus in person, and maybe even the rise of stream games has been going for a while, but now a lot of people are using the internet to either stream games or watch games to get their D&D fix.
Yeah. So I've currently, as a player, I'm currently in 2 campaigns. One is based on Roll20 and one is based in Fantasy Grounds. Coming from the side of things, like I said earlier, about liking the more kind of role play side of things, Fantasy Grounds is probably a better as a quick shot review of both of them. I think Fantasy Grounds is much better for the kind of mechanics side of things. It's got a lot more of the kind of integration of the kind of books and the mechanics and things like that to set that thing up. Whereas Roll20 is kind of just more here is an area which it has a dice roller and a place where people can set up a chat setup. Of the two, I prefer Roll20 because I like I said, I don't like the bogged downness of the kind of tweaking of the mechanical parts of things that Fantasy Grounds have. But they're both very good kind of software packages in their own right. In terms of how I kind of, in my kind of situation, seen these sorts of things, I think the online concept of things to start as certainly in the current climate that we're living in right now, it's a great placeholder for me as a person. For me, there is much more enjoyment in being in and around the people you're playing these games with. Obviously, that's not necessarily always doable in the grand scheme of things, but ideally, if in a perfect world and situation, being around the same table, because one thing that's really quite nice about doing sort of stuff is setting atmosphere in a room. And it's very hard to translate that as a DM across a digital platform, because if you want to kind of build a horror setting where you dim the lights, you get some nice kind of ominous music in the background, it's a lot more difficult to do that if somebody's in their house in the middle of the day in a brightly lit room. The sense of tension and drama that you can build in an enclosed space when you're actually all together is a lot more impactful than it would be necessarily over digital means. But obviously, given the circumstances that we're in, digital means is what we have. So I think it's a really good placeholder for that sort of setup. It's also a really good tool for people who aren't necessarily able to make it to situations where they can play together in a physical space. So it's a useful tool in that respect. But for me, it is a kind of replacement or a placeholder for being in the space with other people, because as a DM, that sense of building and creating drama and tension is a lot more palpable in a physical sense rather than doing it over a digital setting.
Yeah, I do remember in the last few weeks, Roll20 was overwhelmed because of the amount of traffic that it was seeing. So we definitely know that more people are playing online than they were before shelter in place, shelter at home orders went into place. For me, most of my tabletop RPG gameplay has been online anyways, other than a small situation prior. My first game was online with Jody, and I've had a few situations where I've said, yes, I prefer online, because if someone needs to go to the bathroom or get snacks or something, they just mute themselves, go away, and they are not distracting from the story that's taking place. That being said, that was based off of the great online games that I had versus that first play experience that was constantly getting interrupted by people really not paying attention and doing other things and then coming back, which didn't work with how I wanted to play. And I've had some really great in-person games as well, and I miss those people that I've played with. But online lets me play with people in Brazil and Australia and London, and people who I wouldn't normally get to play with, like Jody and Don, and people not around me. So there is definitely a trade-off happening here. So I really think that some of it depends on the people that you have around you, those players, and hopefully they're people that you love and get along with great and have great dynamics in person. And some of it is about accessibility. Like, I have a game later today with people who up until last week I'd never played with, because they were all just so busy and in different corners of the universe, basically. But because of what's happening now, they all need an outlet, and so we're able to sit down together online and play.
So what you're saying is you're confirming that you play with aliens.
Yes. I maybe can't confirm or deny the existence of aliens, but I can confirm that I play with aliens.
So for me, like, I have 3 games that I DM. Two are weekly. One's kind of like a bi-weekly one because it's like every 3 or 4 days. One's consistently on one day, and then I have a monthly game. And the monthly game's online. It's been Roll20 for a couple of years now, because it's that same thing that kind of Ilya mentioned. I'm trying to connect, Canada and Ohio and LA and all sorts of areas together. And for me, I've always felt this, and maybe it's because while I did start, thanks to Jody, in online mostly, I've been mostly in person now for the past 4 or 5 years DMing. That it's never the same, because there's that weird innate thing about momentum and being able to read the room and feel the energy of somebody being there. And I know my faults as a DM, and like I know I live in the theater of the mind, and I live off of feeling and atmosphere, and I use music extensively, and I try to use all sorts of little tricks and trades of like soundboard stuff to try to get my players. So and I can do that online, but the ability to see the reaction in real time of how they react to that song, that's the horror song, and then being like, I hate this song so much. Oh man, something's bad or something's weird about that old dude, right? There's something creepy going on. Like, that reaction gives me so much joy. Or when they have 2 intense like role play moments, the fact that they can read each other and he or she can then pick up on, oh, there's like a subtlety into that which you don't get online. However, but because of this current situation that we're in, I'm playing now more than I have ever. I mean, my monthly games now bi-weekly. All my other games have been shifted over. And yeah, while it's not the same thing, I understand how very important it is. And it's one of those things. I was actually going to one of the things that got canceled because of this was I was going to be on a local convention panel and had to do a slideshow about like welcome to RPGs. This is what they like, and what I think is great about online, and I will never poo-poo this, is you get to limit how much you want to interface with people. You can turn off your video, or you can mute, or you can be as reclusive as you want, or as outgoing as you want. As to when you're in the room with somebody, there's kind of an innate, you know, you got to get over this hurdle of being in a room with people and dealing with their personalities and all that stuff. And I think that's great when it comes to bringing people in, especially if they're super, super introverted or have a lot of nerves. But I think the best expression of this format is done around the table. The amount of community you build, here's what a friend of mine told me, not my thing, but I like it. He goes, I can play a pickup game online, no problem, but everybody who gets around my table becomes my friend, because they're coming into my home space. They're eating food with me. We're spending 3 hours. I know they commuted to get there and have to commute to get back. So this is pretty much an inconvenience. So there's this shared kind of sacrifice that we're all doing, and that bonds us then through the adventures and stories we tell. So, I'm missing that. I'm an introvert, and I usually shouldn't be bad in situations like this, but I kind of miss being able to turn to my guys and gals and see their faces and stuff like that. But again, in the situation where we're at, I still think this is a great method of doing and telling stories.
And I'd like to as someone with severe disabilities and things that prevent me from engaging in the ways I used to. Just for a little bit background, I started DMing 6 or 7 years ago. My memory is gone from bad med interactions, but I've been doing it for a while, and I started playing by going to my friendly local good game store on D&D Encounters night, and I met some great people. And then when our DM wasn't able to show up, I jumped into the DM seat just because no one else was there, and the rest is history. I used to not only did I used to do the convention scene in Wisconsin, where I live, which D&D and tabletop RPGs are massive here. We have 2 different conventions that Wizards of the Coast sends all their head guys down here. We have Gary Con, named after Gary Gygax, and Gamehole Con. They get Chris Perkins and Chris Lindsay and all the big Wizards of the Coast guys every year. They're down here to twice a year. Satine Phoenix comes down for Gary Con. Matt Mercer and half the Critical Role cast come to Gary and Gamehole Con. And I had, I think, half a dozen different conventions I used to do where I would earn hotel rooms and tickets by just running crap tons of games. And I even helped organize, became part of the convention staff for one of the conventions and organized all the D&D stuff. So I used to very much be for in-person playing, and I would play with randos from different states. We had some conventions I was at, people would drive 1,000 miles to come to the convention. It wasn't often. I didn't go to that many huge conventions, but
nonetheless, I mean, that's a commitment. Absolutely.
Yeah. But the idea of the accessibility factor of online games I can't really overemphasize. Again, for me, I have a panic disorder with agoraphobia and conversion disorder, along with a bunch of other things. What that means is I have panic attacks that have no triggers. They just happen randomly, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. But because of that, simply leaving my safe space can cause panic attacks. And conversion disorder means my panic attacks and my anxiety can give me physical symptoms. Specifically for me, I have stress-induced seizures. So putting me in a situation that makes me uncomfortable not only can cause me to have panic attacks, which are extremely uncomfortable, but no one's ever died from them. But for me, I can have a seizure, fall on the ground and strike my head on something, or fall and have something fall on me or something, and I can get seriously hurt. So online games versus this is someone like me, where I physically can't. It's somewhat dangerous for me to do it. And for other people too. Like I have a speech impediment that I haven't had for most of my life. I was a very good speaker up until conversion disorder screwed me. The ability to play a game where you can interact with everyone through text is a huge deal for people that are very self-conscious about their own speech impediments, or if they have other things like if they're deaf, finding a DM that can sign can be, or can at least understand signing, can be extremely difficult, whereas most people that play RPGs can read to text. It's kind of a prereq. So the accessibility options and aspect of online tabletop gaming, I think is something a lot of people don't think about, but is extremely important for allowing people that normally couldn't play for whatever reason to be able to do this. I personally, because I've been doing it online, like I've been playing games online for 6 or 7 years as well, with all of you, remarkably enough. I have learned ways to create empathetic bonds and create tension and the things like that without having the ability to dim the lights and control everything. And yeah, it's a lot harder. But I think it's still possible. You just have to work a lot harder to do it, and you kind of have to get everyone to buy into it. I had a game that ended, and I knew it was going to end in the back of my mind for a couple of months, because as much as I was giving everything, the rest of the players weren't buying into it, which at a tabletop game can and it does happen, but it's harder to kind of sit back and do nothing when there's people around you. Like you automatically kind of get drawn in, whereas if all you have is a screen, hit the mute button, bring out your phone, and crush all those candies until it's your turn for combat. So yeah, I kind of see both sides, but I'm a huge advocate for accessibility and real accessibility. I get kind of annoyed when people make excuses for things like this game needs to have an easy mode so that disabled gamers can play. No, there are other accessibility things that are much better for disabled gamers, like sticky keys and stuff like that, that prevent things like this from making you hit buttons too many times. That's accessibility, and easy mode is a design choice. But that actually wasn't the rant I was thinking of going on.
But the point you made was great too. Like the thing about accessibility and like tuning the game and tuning the system, like the beauty of the internet and the beauty of a lot of these systems, be it Fantasy Grounds, be it Roll20, be it whatever your interface is, if you are using a system interface, is you can create and input that, and you can limit, or give more back. I mean, the thing I need to do now, because this indefinite amount of time as this situation is like start working about like, all right, I'm going to create maps ahead of time and create the fog of war, and then create these effects here, and then hide these things on the DM layer, so then I bring them into the game when they pop up and appear. Because those who I've seen who manipulate this perfectly and well online, or like the purchase material I have where it has all the maps ready for you and all the, like, here's the handouts you can give your players, just send them this command, and then they do this, and I'm like, this is super in depth, and it's really, really great. And that's an opportunity to where also, like, we always talking about accessibility and coming into a game, the fact that you can click into an adventure and it has all the parts set up, and then you can just read the little like blurb where it's like, once I get to here, go to third page and run this battle, and here's the stat blocks, and here are the minis already placed on the board. That's really awesome.
I personally am a proponent of accessibility should never be an afterthought. That when we are making games or when we're running games, we shouldn't say, well, this is what the game says, and therefore your disability or your accessibility issue is in conflict, and that's your problem. I do remember this story about, I think it was a librarian who was trying to run a um, RPG game, and one of their students wasn't really getting involved in interacting, and they found out that the student was English as a second language and had a lot of trouble with English. So what they ended up deciding was that their character in the game did not speak common. They all decided that common would be English, and other characters who were bilingual with their elf, I think was the race. So other characters who were Elvish and I believe could speak Spanish then would communicate with them, and they made it a more interactive game for that student. So yeah, accessibility should never be an afterthought or even like a detriment. You can always find a way to make it work and make it rich for everyone involved, I think.
So the rant I did want to go on, which I'm not going to mention specifics because I don't want to call anybody out, but there's not a whole lot of people, there's not a whole lot of good groups that this could refer to. So if you really want to figure out who I'm talking about, you can figure it out. But something I've seen discussed specifically with streamed games or the things like that is the idea of, well, we play in person because it's a higher quality show, and if we were to limit ourselves or we were to downgrade ourselves to an online game, we would ruin our image or we would ruin our. It's not the kind of quality we want to put out there, and really kind of putting down the idea of playing online. To the point where it's not. I haven't heard too many people phrase it this specific way, but it kind of comes off as, well, that's not a real game. Like, yeah, sure, if that's all you can get, then go ahead. But we are real players, and we get people. We have them all in the same room, and if we were to try to do this online, it would just ruin our brand. So we're not going to do that, and that pisses me the hell off, because while I do agree with you guys that in person games there is something very unique that you can't get with an online game, and I will never argue against that. If you look at the success of shows like the Dice Camera Action, which was entirely streamed and one of the highest quality shows out there, or even the C Team shifted from in-person games to online, I think in less than a week. Like, they shoot in Seattle because they're Penny Arcade, and like the order came out that, hey, the lockdown order, or the stay-at-home, whatever they call it there, came out, and the next episode they shot was entirely online. I think it's been a couple weeks since I've watched CC Team. Yeah, I have this really strong aversion to the idea that, well, online game is a lesser version of playing. No, it's a different version, and you can make extremely high quality content online without having to spend billions of dollars buying everyone HD movie quality cameras and recording studio quality. Words are hard, guys.
Recording studio quality, you got it, bud.
Thank you. Mics and that, like, you can still make amazing, really high quality content that advertisers want to sponsor and sell stuff through, which is the big motivation of a lot of these companies, because they gotta pay people.
Yep.
So, your opinions on that, if you have them.
Well, in terms of like how my kind of perception of things is, the reason why I kind of, when I was talking about kind of the difference between physical and digital platforming and this kind of replacement, is like playing these games is all about communication between the players and the DM, about the stories that they're telling together as a group. For me, that is a more fluid and kind of dynamic setup, obviously in person. There's a lot fewer instances where you kind of somebody finishes talking and then there's that kind of wait whilst everyone has realised that person has stopped talking for the next person to then start talking, which can sometimes happen a little bit when you are doing stuff in a digital medium.
I have
We're interrupting
no
somebody
idea.
right there about to say something.
And that's the sort of thing that you can kind of get a little bit happen in a digital setting. But at the end of the day, it's all about communicating, and you don't need fancy like physical props or digital maps. At the end of the day, the sessions I run with the kids at school, it's all theatre of the mind stuff. We don't have minis, we don't have maps. It's all me describing things, them talking about the things they want to do, because it's them picturing what's going on and those sorts of elements. And we don't need fancy equipment and things like that. Obviously, partly because budgets and stuff, I wouldn't be able to afford it. But it's that kind of setup. And a lot of the games I play are in person. That I play are theatre in the mind ones, where we play based off imaginations and we kind of picture what the scenes are and we describe the scenes in those sorts of contexts. Obviously, when it comes to digital settings, I think a lot of people feel that they need to use the screen, in terms of they're like, oh, well, we've got this monitor, we need to put something there for people to look at, otherwise they're not going to engage. Which for some people that might be the case, but for others, when I was doing kind of stuff for when I was running the Labyrinth one online last week, I just put like, my background was just kind of like nice concept art pieces from the Labyrinth movie, just kind of in the background, just so it was something, so you weren't just looking at a blank screen, there was at least something nice to look at. But I wasn't putting in maps and things like that, because it was more about describing the scenes and putting those things into context. So it's all about how well you communicate with the people, and you can do that over a digital platform like we're doing today. You can have those sorts of things in place. I think it's just a case of that everybody needs to be aware of those communication elements, and it does take a bit of getting used to with the pacing and timing of talking over these kind of group chat things online. But once you get into that like rhythm and that pacing of settings of things, you can be just as effective, as you've pointed out, Jody. The kind of you can be just as effective in communicating in those settings as you can be in a physical setting. It's about what people are kind of overly comfortable in being able to do. And at the end of the day, it's what makes people the most comfortable. You're not going to enjoy yourself if you're like stressed out and tense and uncomfortable in the situation. You're not going to enjoy it. So making it so that it's accessible, so that people enjoy themselves and have fun, is the most important thing about playing these sorts of games. Because at the end of the day, it's a game. It's the final one in that kind of setup of things. It's about people enjoying themselves. And if you can't put that in a way that allows people to have fun, then it's not really a game anymore, and people aren't going to want to play it. So it's kind of, I think it's an important thing to just be able to, as long as you can like deliver something that then people can then, it's communicating, whether that's verbally, via text, whether it's whatever kind of system you do, communication is communication.
And as someone studying communication at the graduate level,
and teaching it, I believe,
and teaching, yes, a lot of what I end up studying is basically performance, whether it's Twitch live streams or something on the stage. And what I've been spending a lot of time with recently is disability and deaf performance, and looking at the ways that these conditions sounds very wrong. It's not what I mean, but the right word's not coming to my mind. How they can be integrated, not just added to the performance, I think actually enriches what's happening. So, like I was joking earlier about giving my paper about Spring Awakening to someone because I have to write a rough draft this week. But that's not just about the musical Spring Awakening. It is specifically about Deaf West Theater's revival of Spring Awakening and how they integrated ASL in the choreography and in every aspect of the storytelling, not just by having an interpreter off to the side signing. And in the presentation of this at the 2017, I want to say, Tony Awards, the introduction says that they are performing theater the way that it is meant to be for everyone. And that really hit home to me, and is why that is what I've been focusing on so much recently. And I think that comments like it's not as good or it's not our quality is putting accessibility as an afterthought, not as a forethought, and not considering what kind of message that they're actually putting out in the world when they say that. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you, Jody, that being in person can be great, but that is not the only way to play, and we should never diss someone else's way of playing because it's not the same as ours.
The only thing I have to add to the end of that is at the end of the day, we all want to have fun. Mm-hmm. And the means you do that is irrelevant almost. You can enjoy a comedy show on Netflix just as you can in person. You can get the benefits of a therapy session through a virtual as opposed to being sit there. None of that matters. So this is just a means for us to enjoy each other's company and have a good time. Whatever way you do that, again, it doesn't matter. So anybody who wants to belittle or bemoan is missing the entire point of what we do. And which point sounds like they're trying to, I guess, create drama and strife for ulterior motives. And that's a conversation for another time also. But yeah, they're just going away from the reason we do this.
Well, with that uplifting this is subject matter, I think that's going to do it for this episode of how many things can I plug while talking about RPGs. I'm thinking, like, for the rest of the show, I'm just going to come up with more new names and change the name of the show just over and over and over
that way,
again.
Every episode is episode 1.
Yeah.
It's just a new name, episode 1.
On the idea of plugging, if the lovely audience here would like to see more of the stuff that you do, and specifically if you can, let us know the other kind of stuff that you do that they might find, whether it's on Twitter and that. We'll start with Ben. If people want to find and interact with more of this stuff that you could create or do, where would they find you?
Okay, there are numerous places that you can find me in various kind of degrees. Obviously, a lot of them involve my tag as being Ben the Bear with a 3 instead of an E in the. I do Twitch streams 3 to 4 times a week.
And he has the voice of an angel.
Of which my next stream is tomorrow.
There we go. We got him to plug.
My next stream is tomorrow at 7 p.m. GMT, which I don't know how the time conversion works. You've got Google. I also do artwork, so you can catch me on ArtStation or Instagram using the same extension, which is Ben the Bear. Where I'll post artwork on those sorts of aspects of things. That's kind of the main 2 areas in which I do stuff. So that's where people can kind of catch me, is through those sorts of things.
Awesome. Ilea, if people want to find this is stuff that you do.
So I just ended up Googling myself.
Live
And
on the
you-
internet, folks.
Oh,
Self
it's a
googling.
dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, which is why I usually tell my students, I teach intro to digital communication this semester, and I tell my students in communication, please don't Google me, because a lot of stuff comes up. But I would say right now, best places to follow me are on Twitter, which is at Green Eyed T-Bone, which has links to a lot of like articles and different things I've done, as well as my YouTube, which is youtube.com/greeneyedtrombonist, where I have started posting distance learning lectures and material for my students. And I think I'm probably going to keep doing educational based videos, but they're about things like the origin of musical theater and whether games are a separate culture or if we should study them as part of a culture and things like that. So I think they're fun.
And this Saturday, if you want to see her in her murder hobo aspect, she's on my Zelda RPG we run on to twitch.tv/Zelda Universe TV.
Zelda RPG.
Yeah, it's we use Open Legend and it's a blast. It's Saturday mornings.
Realms of the Wild.
So cool.
I play a Zora named Zolta. She maybe sucks the life energy out of things. She's not evil. I swear.
And she has the best part about this character. She
I have
has
a
a
three-headed
pet.
dragon lizard reptile thing. His name is Gary Larry Jerry.
It's been interesting. It's
Oh,
this
wow.
pet has evolved over this campaign, which is now we've been doing it for 2.5 years.
Oh wow.
So
Awesome.
yeah. Anyway, I had to get that plug in there.
Yeah.
That's a good plug.
Don, do you have anything that you did do?
I think he would have said so by now if he had.
Yeah, I think we probably don't even need to mention it.
I mean, you know, he seems
yeah.
like the kind.
Let me see if I can bring it to the tip of my tongue. But no, yeah, most of the things, if you guys want to find out, just search classy_Don, that's DON, and it'll link to my Twitter, Instagram, everything from the music I've done to the, actually, thanks for mentioning that, Jody. Going on Zelda RPG. I was on there. I was a guest for stuff like that. And my own RPG podcast, which is called My RPG Podcast, where it's more of a one-on-one kind of no video, just all audio podcast, talking about anything related to RPGs as well, usually with one guest. And yeah, just love this format. You can find me on there. Say hi.
I know I've been on it. Ilea, have you done his podcast yet?
I don't think so, but if you search for Ilea Marion Pig on Google, a couple podcasts I have done come up, including the Who Pod, Audio Entropy, and of course Sunnydale Study Group.
Oh yeah, other amazing, wonderful people. Yeah. Blair does a Who Pod, who's I believe has been on my RPG podcast.
Blair's not been on my RPG.
He hasn't?
No, it hasn't happened, but hopefully it will. I've also been sort of plugging Blair. He does an amazing radio podcast called Harley Human, and I was a voice on that. So plug that. There you go.
And then for me, I am Trainer Jody everywhere. Obviously, I have my Twitch channel here where every other Wednesday night currently I stream a custom RPG. It's D&D, but it's like a custom setting that currently the party is preparing for a vampire to attack. Because one of the players happened to catch the eyes of her kind of boyfriend. And so, yeah, that has been fun, and I killed a character off. It was great. So do that. I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/TrainerJody. I've got a couple different series on there. One of them is player faves, where I take, like, I think my most recent one was the Green Ranger, the Green Power Ranger. I might have had another one since then. Oh, but Batman Beyond. I made, not only do I make D&D character sheets, I make Adventures League legal character sheets. So theoretically, if you wanted to play these characters in the Adventures League, you could. You would just have to level them from 1 to the sheets I make are either level 6 or 7. But yeah, you can take them out into the real world. And I also have things like the D&D Deep Dive, where I talk about mechanics and stuff and how to play classes and how they're designed. Lots of stuff on there. And I just got into the Watch Party beta. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can sit down and watch a few Amazon Prime shows with me. I did one yesterday where or Saturday, I think, where we watched the first episode of Farscape and had dinner together with a couple people. And it's lots of fun. So yeah, follow my Twitch and YouTube, and on Twitter is where I'm most active. I'm Trainer Jody everywhere. So any other big things from people before we sign off? Cool. Dead air is always good.
Now what? I want to give her the opportunity. Wash your damn hands. All right.
Yeah.
Don't touching people. Make sure you also do some self-care. No, there's no judgment. I'll get on a soapbox for one section. Actually, there's a lot of people who are going through some difficult times right now, and there's a whole bunch of people on it, like Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. Who are like, right now is when you should be doing all those goals you wanted to do, and you should maximize everything and be super productive and blah blah blah. No, man, we're going through a tough time right now. So whatever it is that gets you through the day, if it's playing games, watching Netflix, or just staying in bed crying, because sometimes it's just so fucking difficult to get through. So difficult to get through. That's 100% acceptable. Do some self-care. It's going to be all right. We'll make it at the end of this, and then we'll see each other at the table, hopefully.
Maybe don't Google me, because there's some weird stuff.
Also, don't Google Ilea.
Which is spelled A-I.
Yeah,
anyway,
there's literally no one else it could be if you put my whole name there. Yay, individualism.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to my guests. You guys have been wonderful and amazing, lovely people. I don't know when the next episode of the Plug Me Baby podcast is going to go live, but follow my Twitter, because that's where I will plug it. Anyway, that's all for me today. If you missed any of this show, I'm uploading it to my YouTube channel, so check it out there. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys and then the next time. All right? Bye-bye.